Hello, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Thank you for coming back to my channel. This video is about United States isolationism. When did it start? What is it? Does it make sense? And will the United States move back to that position? You may remember that George Washington, the founding president of the United States, said that the US should not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. So don't look for a fight. Really, mind your own business, stay out of trouble. That's it. To avoid entangling alliances. So when the United Kingdom went to war against France, shortly after American independence, he strove to keep the United States out of that conflict. So the United States should concentrate on its own matters. But the United States in the 1780s versus here we are, like 240 years later, is very, very different. A country of only about 3 million people then, seen as being on the edge of the civilized world, now the center of the civilized world, now as a country of over 340 million people, a superpower with global reach is very, very different. One thing is that the US Army until the Second World War was actually very small most of the time. Okay, ballooned during the American Civil War, briefly during the First World War, mostly quite small. The Navy was very, very big because they thought, well, we can't be attacked by Canada. We're outnumbered them 10 to 1, then part of the British Empire. Mexico, they thrashed in 1848, no worries there. They could only be attacked by sea and to control their possessions, direct and indirect possessions in the Caribbean Sea, the Pacific, and so forth. Um, what else? But the U.S. military didn't have the best equipment, was poorly funded. Same to the Marine Corps. The Air Force was the Air Corps, was actually part of the Army until 1948. Is the Second World War revolutionized American foreign policy? So there'd been American isolationism that they would do business with any country, but they would not take sides in international conflicts. Now they had fought against Spain, for example, over the USS Maine blowing up. They were sympathetic to Cuban independence, and so on. Occasional interventions in the Caribbean, the Monroe Doctrine, that they didn't want European countries to gain any more possessions in the American continent, um, and the corollary to that. So the US, they mostly fought shy of foreign conflicts, but they did become an imperial power themselves in the Pacific Ocean. Much though Americans may deny it, they did. There's no two ways about it. We're starting at the Hawaii, then off the coast of China and so on, joining the United Kingdom in the First Opium War, but then doing their damnedest to keep out of the First World War, eventually being dragged in. And even Woodrow Wilson, when he was re-elected in 1916, his slogan was, "I kept you out of the war." His Republican opponent, Charles Evans Hughes, was also in favor of keeping the United States out of what they considered to be a European internal conflict, which is no business of the USA, but nevertheless brought into it, really by Germany assuming it was inevitable the United States would come in, and the Zimmermann telegram, where the German foreign minister said, "Well, as the United States is going to attack us anyway, Mexico, why don't you take back that land they took from you in 1848, which would be 6 complete states and segments of a further 4?" Anyway, the Mexicans very wisely stayed out. They were not suicidal. Um, but and likewise, not even ratifying the Treaty of Versailles, and not even joining the League of Nations in the 1920s, and then brought into the Second World War only because Japan launched an unprovoked attack on them, and then Germany proclaimed war on them 3 days later. But so then things changed. The Americans said, well, we have to be involved in this world order, and NATO and so on. But isolation was very popular before the Second World War. Many Americans felt it would be a fatal mistake to get involved in the First World War. Partly they've been selling weapons to both sides, but much more to the Allies, partly because of the blockade, they couldn't get things to the Central Powers very much. $16 billion of purchases from the Allies in the First World War, only $1 billion of purchases in the Central Powers. Therefore, it was in America's interest the Allies should win. They'd be able to pay them back, and so forth. But some people say we should have stayed out of that war. Left wingers as well as right wing isolationists. And then there was the America First Committee in the United States in the 1930s saying we must stand aloof from conflicts in Asia or in Europe, and we'll trade with any country, but we're not going to fight for them. It's actually not a problem. We've got enough problems of our own. And so that was popular. The young John F. Kennedy was a member of the America First Committee, as was another future president, Gerald Ford. But anyway, days after Pearl Harbor, the America First Committee dissolved itself. We did our uttermost to stay out of the war, We were attacked anyway, therefore we must throw ourselves into this war effort, which we didn't invite, which we didn't provoke, that we have to defend ourselves. But anyway, after the Second World War, there were those who argued business as usual, go back to isolationism, that what happens in Europe or Asia is actually not our problem, not our business, that the Soviets are not going to come here, the communists aren't really a threat to us. By then, an unpopular position. But the Korean War, where the United States was fighting there, that still became deeply unpopular and muttering, well, why should we care? Most have never ever heard of Korea. So, and actually, the president's approval ratings were actually quite low at the time, Truman. And that's when Eisenhower came to office. He was keen to end it as soon as possible. And indeed, he managed to. Um, and so that's why, goodness, there was a lot of anti-communist propaganda, not that was lying. So that's America First slogan alludes to the America First Committee of the 1930s, and Charles Lindbergh, the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic, was obviously the poster boy for that organization, often panned as a crypto-fascist since. And there's Andrew J. Batchovich, a former U.S. Army officer. He's written about that. Washington rules, primary station of the U.S. military with the United States. Serving abroad must be very much the exception. There's A Republic, Not an Empire by Pat Buchanan. So the Reform Party tends to advocate for that, like when Ross Perot was big in the 90s. And so now it's come back, and now Trump openly talking about withdrawal from NATO, spend our money on ourselves, defend ourselves, and don't go picking fights. Yeah. Okay. So there's a considerable minority take that view. But there's been pushback within the Republican Party from Lindsey Graham in particular, from Trump's isolationist rhetoric, that Trump's obviously so inconsistent, there's no telling where he's going to turn next. Where will his next flight of fancy be to? So he could easily swivel and go the other way. But yeah, so there's some people who would like that and might save the money, but he's very much invested in doing whatever Israel wants. But apart from that, fairly isolationist. And I can see that there's an argument there that the United States just build up Fortress America, withdraw its troops, have them spend their money at home, maybe even slim down the defense budget, and who cares what happens anywhere else? So that Russia, China don't intend to attack us, and they wouldn't do successfully if they wanted to. But the thing is, they might crush all America's partners, trade partners, and so on. Then the US could be in an invidious position. They lose access to natural resources. So they didn't have all these troops abroad out of sheer generosity of spirit. Partly there was his enlightened self-interest. So I don't think that Trump will go all that way. And I know he directs foreign policy, but perhaps even he's not quite that stupid. And some of the military top brass think that this will be very dangerous to them. Too much slimming down the military. Well, the military-industrial complex wouldn't like that one. Right. Thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate to PayPal, georgecanan79@gmail.com. Toodaloo.